Endeavours of Sherlock Holmes, The Adventure of the Paradol Chamber, is copyright 2014 by its author, Sandor Jay Sonnen. All rights reserved. Endeavours of Sherlock Holmes. 1. The Adventure of the Paradol Chamber by Sandor Jay Sonnen. 1 year previous, January 1886, had brought with it a harsh and heavy snowstorm, the likes of which many in England had never experienced. During one 12-hour period, an inch of snow fell on London for every hour, and whether town or country bred, the subjects of a city used to cold were miserable. Traffic, commerce and daily life came to a halt, and the foremost thought in the minds of all was to get to their homes, have their suppers, and curl up into their beds as soon as responsibilities allowed. Now, a year later, the average resident feared for the same, and once Christmas passed, each prepared their lives as best they could for another such winter. Fears of new snow and cold were the featured discussions of many, and my practice, new and generally unsuccessful, during the first few months since I had bought the business, had a few weeks of steady clients, hoping to ward off colds and flus by coming to me for preventive remedies. I had been in the consulting room attached to my home with 12 patients, one after the other, and it was only after the last of them left that my wife entered with a tray of biscuits, seltzer water, and a brief note which my wife told me had been brought to our home by a boy while I was in my consultancy. It read, "Have an interview that may prove interesting. If you can, meet me at noon on the Strand at Southampton. S.H." My wife beamed a smile at me and told me to take some nourishment as she went to find my heavy coat and overshoes. Her expression told the story of a woman who hadn't complained, as I had done my best to make something out of the recently acquired practice that had slow goings. Seeing as many clients come to my practice this morning had lifted both of our spirits, and I believed she viewed my being able to meet my friend as a celebration. In less than half of an hour, I found myself walking from Charing Cross Station to Southampton Street. Without the blizzards which the metropolis had feared, the city was alive with people and horses in the middle of a good day of work. Sherlock Holmes was on my side of the Strand, looking up across the street at the edifice that was the Savoy Theatre. I noticed he was interested in the scaffolding that had been built up along one side of the Opera House and leading to the furthest southern portion of the now vast property. I had watched it grow in size during my visits to the theatre last year. The average member of London society had become accustomed to the speed in which progress had continued to build structures higher with every passing year, but the construction at the Savoy was different. The expansion of its building and the making of what would be a vast hotel had become the talk of the city. I met Holmes at the corner, and together we crossed the street and passed construction workers, and their many piles of wood and other materials, as we made our way to what was still the decorative frontage of the Savoy. He said to me quietly, "I received a note from Richard Cart himself," before we made our way through the lobby, where a day usher greeted us. "I'm sorry, gents. The queue for tickets is out front on the left. You might have missed it with the construction blocking your view. Let me take you out." He began to escort us back the way we had come in. "No, thank you. We are here on appointment and are expected," Holmes said to the middle-aged man in a neat red and black uniform. "Please take us to Mr. Cart's office." The usher was astonished. "Well, there may be, but Mr. Cart is not available to anyone this afternoon. But you said you are on his appointment and not he on yours. That would make a difference." My brief glance at my friend made it obvious to me that he was not impressed with the man's choice of words, of what was probably what he understood to be his employer's instructions. His tone carried with it the implication that it was only Richard Doyley Cart who was a man of affairs. Holmes decided the usher needed to choose between helping him or stepping aside. "Mr. Cart has asked for my assistance, and I am certain that in some way he has made provision for my recognition and my being brought to him. If you are not the man for this errand, please convey me to one who is." The man's facial expression and demeanour changed over some seconds. "Yes, sir," he said. and he turned and began to escort us away from the lobby. Mr. Cart and Mr. Sullivan and Mr. Gilbert are usually quick with a good humour, but there's something about today. His voice may have been designed to trail off, or it may have been a flat statement. I wasn't certain, but I found his unasked for views lacking in discretion. Holmes glanced at me for a moment and gave a quick smile as the two of us walked behind the self-important and yet somewhat nervous servant. We were led not to the administrative offices of the Savoy, wherever they may have been situated, but were instead taken through the central doors of the theatre proper and led down the floor toward the stage, where we immediately noticed a rehearsal in progress. Many eyes were on us as we came into the view of both those in the seats near the stage and those on the stage itself. One who was in the former group broke away from a small number of others and some musicians in the pit, making his way to us. "Gentlemen," his eyes embraced each of us in turn. Then, "Thank you, Mr. Richard," he said to the usher who, after taking in as best he could a sweeping view of everyone present, took his leave. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson." It was obvious he knew each of us from the other. "D'Oyly Cart, a pleasure." He shook our hands in turn. Cart was a dashing figure. He wasn't large by any means, but had a perfect balance of gentlemanly good looks and the hint of rogue. His beard and facial expressions presented a mischievous youth who appeared younger than the man in his 40s I knew him to be. "This new opera is going to be the death of me," he said quietly. He turned to those seated and those on stage. "Lunch!" Then to us. God knows they could use it. "We've been killing ourselves all day with these new changes. Did you see the notices this morning? Ghastly." He walked us back the way from where we had come in, while he continued his commentary. "Well, anything we put before the public after the Mikado was bound to not entirely satisfy as that one had. But this Ruddigore, witch's curse nonsense, might as well have been cursed. I've got Gilbert down there trying to save the second act, and Sullivan has gone off to make some revisions, and I just don't know." Holmes and I trailed behind the man and glanced at one another. Such were the slings and arrows of life in the management of a theatre company, especially one expected to produce fresh material and continued successes. Carter spoke about the play as we followed him, and to use a theatrical way of describing it, it was as though Holmes and I had entered at the beginning of a second act, unaware of much of the drama to which the man was referring. The word revision passed from his lips more than once. "Mr. Richard," Carter said to the usher, who was standing square in the centre of the lobby where we had first met him, "please tell Mr. Howard to come to my office, thank you." "At once," the man replied, and walked away from where he stood. Cart took us to his private office in the theatre's administrative wing. We passed through an outer office where a handsome woman who barely registered our approaching her desk was bent over a ledger. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, this is Miss Shaw." Brief pleasantries were exchanged as we made our way to Cart's private office. He offered us seats and took the executive chair behind a handsome mahogany desk, littered with sheet music and various documents here and there. A place in the exact centre of the desk showed a leather blotter that had been built into the desktop. His office was elegant without being overly so, mahogany and beveled glass being its principal elements. On the walls were copies of posters from past performances, and some of the titles I recognised. Ellis Danders has been with us for 3 years and is our night watchman. He works throughout our property, which has expanded in recent months to include some new constructions, namely our hotel immediately adjacent to the theatre. This hotel is an important undertaking, and I will protect it any way needs be. Though not yet completed, it is already viewed in important circles as what will soon be a principal fine lodging destination. This is more than a graduated bed and board with handsome trimmings. This is a hotel that itself is a destination and reason for visiting our city. and while others may state that this has happened before, it has not been done on our scale. That is, certainly not with the appointments we are preparing, the private bathrooms for the large majority of the rooms, and outstanding services which will be made available to the traveller. We will be opening our doors soon not only to the rich, but to the well-to-do middle classes that have been travelling recently. Well-heeled and in their own right capable of appreciating fine service, the best food, and naturally Savoy entertainment. The builders of the project work from about 8 in the morning until the light no longer allows. We have a swing watchman who works from noon until 8 at night. By 10 or 11, the performance having ended, the outside area, which is Dander's jurisdiction, is empty of any people as he visits various points during his rounds until the dawn. Sometime during the night, Dander's vanished, Cartier stated with a serious tone. This is in fact unheard of. He's a trusted man who has nearly never missed a shift since he began working for us. We pride ourselves on all of our employees following an exact schedule, without any unilateral changes on the part of any one member. Yet that is exactly what has happened, and that has caused me some worry. And, Mr. Holmes, I am going to have to give you wide latitude of freedom to act, because frankly I cannot spare the smallest amount of my time to deal with this matter. In that case, Holmes said, I'll only ask you where he was last seen, and by whom, and who on your staff can be trusted to discuss with me the usual duties of Dander's and his general movements related to his work. Exactly so. I have sent for his superior, Mr. Howard, who can help you with anything you like, and you can go from there, or so those are my hopes. At that moment, into the front office came what sounded to be the steps of more than one man, and we heard words exchanged with Miss Shaw that held with them some urgency. From her office and into Cartier's came Inspector Lestrade, followed by a uniformed police sergeant, and behind them Mr. Richard and another man. Compared with the clothes worn by Richard, this other man's uniform was less in livery and more in quiet managerial superiority. His was a trimmed black with occasional gold, and this would presumably be Howard, who Mr. Richard was sent to find. Lestrade looked the room over, his eyes taking in our collective counsel. Well, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, and good afternoon, Dr. Watson, he said, looking first at my companion and then to myself. May I help you? Cartier offered to him. Lestrade looked about him. It was not our intention. Lestrade spoke for himself and the sergeant. To bring these gentlemen with us, he stated with a tone of slight fluster. I would have had them wait outside of this office until we first had words. I am Richard d'Oyley Cart, and this is my theatre. How may I help you? Yes, replied Lestrade. I can already see you have enlisted some help for today in the presence of my good friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes. He turned to Holmes for a moment and then back to Cart. And where Mr. Holmes goes, often there is something interesting to have a follow-up. I am Inspector Lestrade from Scotland Yard, and this is Sergeant Randall from the Met. I was hoping you might have some time to come outside and walk with us to the embankment. We have to report to you that there is a body in the uniform of what Sergeant Randall recognises as that of one of your guards, found where the sand meets the water and just under the Waterloo. There was quiet for a moment, though Cart made a noise of some kind. Howard and Richard appeared to already know this, presumably because Lestrade and Randall had questioned them to some degree before they walked into Cart's office. Holmes seemed impassive, but behind his cool reticence I saw his eyes gleam. He looked not at Lestrade, but at the impresario, who looked about the room, at Lestrade, and then at his own employees. Cart broke from behind his desk. Without saying any word, he passed through to Miss Shaw's outer office, and, taking his hat and coat along the way, he took lead from the police detective. As one group we followed him as he moved adroitly to a door that took us through the bowels of the Savoy's operational areas, until he led us to a main rear double door. He opened these and we found ourselves outside and walking toward the construction of what would soon be the Savoy Hotel. Cart wasted no time in choosing the safest and quickest path through the construction, and we followed him through the wood skeleton of what would one day be the massive hotel. Though almost instantly, Holmes had slowed his pace until he was no longer with the others, choosing instead to deviate from Cart's course and walk into and out of the massive structure of wood framing. Holmes talked for brief moments with various workers, inspecting here and there sections of the work in progress. He took various views from the property, standing in the centre of the construction site and looking toward each cardinal direction. He looked at the areas to the sides of the construction, then back toward the rear of the theatre from where we had just come, and out toward what would have been a view of the embankment and the Thames had the trees not obscured his vision. I followed him through the back gate I had observed Cart open for the others. Together Holmes and I moved carefully down a path cluttered with trees and other plant life, until we found our way to where Lestrade, the sergeant, Cart, and the 2 men from the Savoy, who had come along, had assembled to surround a corpse beneath Waterloo Bridge. Notice the absence of footmarks in the dirt anywhere around the body. There is no sign that anyone walked from the lower portion pedestrian or egress of the bridge to the edge of the water. Lestrade was commenting to the group. Holmes looked to the places of which Lestrade spoke. The mud and packed dirt the afternoon had hardened, the path leading to where pedestrians would walk to and from the top, and the underneath areas of the bridge, the water's edge where the body of the unfortunate watchman lay. "This is Ellis Dander's," Carter said in pity. "Was," he corrected himself. "Sergeant, please check for his personals," Lestrade said to Randall. The uniformed officer went through the pockets of the dead man, turning out all of them and finding nothing. Not a wallet, nor note of currency nor paper of any kind. Nothing hard, no coin, no ring, nothing of value. Holmes took the few steps to join the sergeant and crouched to the ground. He inspected the man's face and neck. "Come here, Watson," he said. I looked where Holmes had. "A good deal of bruising at the face and neck is beginning to show." Then I said, "This man has sustained serious internal injury by one hard blow." Holmes appeared interested in my comment, but he was also reacting to what I determined to be his taking in the scent of the uniform, of which even I understood there was something strange about it. "We will find that Dander's was dropped from the top of the bridge, or rolled over its edge, and that he was killed by the fall," pronounced Lestrade. "And the reason for Dander's being on the bridge, and not at the construction site?" asked Holmes. "Oh, he was forced, there would be my guess," replied the inspector. "The post-mortem at the Met will tell all about his fall, no doubt of that." On the walk back, Holmes spoke with Lestrade. "I would like to talk with the doctor who performs the post-mortem." "And why would that be?" "Dr. Watson is probably correct that his body was smashed to death by one blow in some way. What more can there be? There are some unusual features to this presumed murder. At least I believe it is murder," my friend said. "The answers to some of my thoughts in the matter would be explained by the examination of the body and uniform." "The uniform. Well, I will admit you have a certain gift for the strange, but I expect you to share with me your views, should you have any, after you meet with the doctor," Lestrade said. "Naturally. Perhaps as you are allowing me to visit the Metropolitan and discuss the aspects of Dander's corpse with your staff there, I can return the favour by sharing with you the results of conversations I have with Dander's superiors," said Holmes, taking a moment to smile at his reasoning. "You are considering sharing with me my investigation, Mr. Holmes? Well, thank you very much," was Lestrade's response. We returned up the makeshift pathway, and all of us stopped as Cart closed and locked the back gate to the construction site, where earlier he had opened it for the party's benefit. "Did you unlock this a moment ago?" Holmes asked Cart. "Naturally." "Why isn't it opened during the daytime to benefit the workers?" Holmes looked at the 40 or so builders going about their jobs. "Well, Mr. Holmes, there's nothing on this side of the gate that the workers need. I mean, certainly some might benefit getting to the lunch vendors who sell on the embankment, but the burden quite outweighs their doing so. I really don't want anyone coming in from the embankment side of the project, and I don't want the workers to leave this way. All of the materials for building come through the front, where we have a much larger gate and street access, and I want only one thoroughfare for the workers to enter and exit the site, and that's through the same gate where everything comes in and goes out. That is, at the front. Richard and Howard dismissed, and Sergeant Randall left behind with the body under the bridge. Holmes, Lestrade and I were once again in Richard Doyleycart's office to round out our discussion of the matter. Holmes retook his previous chair, as did I, while Lestrade stood by the door and spoke. "Mr. Cart, there are a few things I have to ask you, the answers of which could not be provided by your employees. Was there anything unusual during the past week regarding the theatre productions in relation to either Dander's performance of his duties or the situation at the site itself?" "Nothing unusual at all. Outside of the mess we're in with our new production, nothing's been different around the site. No singular event to speak of. But the production problems we're having wouldn't mean anything to the hotel's construction or the duties of the several watchmen," Cart answered directly. "How did you find your night watchman?" asked Holmes. "No different than most employees of the service and security class. He was referred to us by Talbars. He had been on their books for some years. We don't hire anyone without an aggregate of 5 years' references in their favour. He's been here since we broke clay on the hotel project. Had Danders showed signs of unhappiness at his job or something at home that would be important to our knowing of it?" "Did he have enemies?" asked Lestrade. "Nothing of which I was aware, Inspector, but I really don't know a lot about those types of details. I have enough to worry me with the productions. Perhaps Mr. Howard can assist you there." "One more thing, Mr. Cart," Holmes inquired. "Were there any rules by which Danders had to operate, or did he have a roving commission simply to prevent pilfering from the construction materials and keep an eye out for tramps?" "Ah, that Mr. Holmes you can also get from Stanley Howard. He organised the plan for Dander's duties." Holmes had a conversation with Stanley Howard, and then an unprofitable one with Mr. Richard, and afterward he and I walked the long way around the buildings that flanked the theatre until we found ourselves at the top of Waterloo Bridge. From there I followed Holmes down to its large base this side of the Thames. Dander's body had been cleared away, and Holmes spent some time looking and measuring with his eyes the grounds and the pathway back from where we had just come. I left him alone for this while, and spent my time looking out upon the Thames to see the river's traffic. "Lunch," was his solitary statement, and it, unlike Cart's statement of the word to his performers and musicians, was joyful enough for me to become excited. Holmes suggested we have some beer and ham sandwiches at a pub we had frequented of old, just a few blocks from where we were. We were brought some of their home brew, and Holmes became excited. "So, what do you think of this case of ours?" He used the word ours, and that took me by surprise. "I can help you with your investigation." "Certainly. I expect there will be an interesting result at my meeting with the police doctor after our respite here." "And your survey of the grounds where Danders had his duties?" Holmes was gleeful. "Have you considered just what Danders had to do every night?" "Well," I speculated, "nothing more nor less than his stated position." "And that would be?" Holmes had become a bit canny. "The protection of the building materials from theft and checking for tramps who might attempt to use the covered construction for lodging." There seemed little mystery to me about any of this. For he to leave the gated area is to invite harm and offset the purpose of his work. "Yes, but perhaps you haven't noticed he must leave these various interior spaces to patrol the site of what has become a vast complex. It is not a single large area, but one large one and other smaller ancillary ones. He has keys for gates, and he uses them, including of course the vast rear one. With his keys he can move to the other side of the site, where he must unlock other sections related to the overall site. And though we did not go into these collateral areas, we did learn they are an important part of his rounds. It is when he is penned inside of any of these, once he has locked himself in, that he is impervious to assault. He must use his set of keys and come and go to and from the construction site to visit all of the property to complete his inspection. And as we learned from his superior, Stanley Howard, his assignment requires him to unlock a given gate, walk through it, close it, and then lock that gate once he uses it. Naturally, I replied. That is how any sensible person would do it. Otherwise, one leaves an opened and unguarded gate to the possibility of mischief. I thought Holmes was unable in this case to accept the obviousness of the circumstance. Something had entered his thoughts since his tour of the yard, and he couldn't shake whatever it was. The construction area at Whitehall, where the Metropolitan Force was expanding its offices, did not have the full effect of Richard D'Oyly-Carte's project, but was impressive in its own right. Departments were being moved to new and vastly improved locations, and we found ourselves in a basement at Great Scotland Yard, in a large and impressive vault for post-mortem investigation. We met with a police surgeon and his assistant. Dr. Regatta was an Italian who had done service to the Empire in the Mahdist revolt, and after being decorated, had been grateful to embrace England as his adopted homeland, and mentioned this more than once as he walked us to the remains of Ellis Danders. The deceased died from one hard impact with the ground, most probably from a high fall of several stories, the doctor said, his thick accent filling the otherwise cavernous chamber where the body lay on a slab table, one of a dozen bodies laid out in two, neat rows. Note the bruising is one impact along the side of the body, and note also no other exterior injury, except from where his neck rocked hard and broke. He was most certainly thrown off something. It could not have been a fall of his conscious volition. At least in my experience, and Dr. Watson, you may give your view here, a man falling some 40 feet does not fall on his side as the signs suggest. Also, we have a broken neck, caused by the way the head, loose and agile, we will presume, violently jarred as the body struck the ground. He in no way could have initiated such a fall. Holmes asked. Most certainly not, Dr. Regatta replied. I would hazard a guess that our victim here might have been heaved skyward by two men to increase the height at which he fell. But this is mere speculation for the sake of wonder over why he indeed did die, as opposed to surviving his fall. Why did he not attempt to correct his landing? Falling from that bridge, and in that location, as the report states, a conscious man would attempt such a thing and not impact sideways. Have you been told none of his effects were found with his body? Yes. Nothing was included with his person, save his uniform and underclothes. I wish to inspect his uniform, Holmes said to the medical doctor. An assistant brought them to Regatta and they were laid out. Holmes took some moments inspecting the uniform, turning it inside out and then returning it to its natural state. He inspected it closer and smelled the thick tunic-like overshirt. Ah, yes, said Regatta. There is something there, is that not so? Something, agreed Holmes. I noticed it earlier. I followed suit and noticed it also. The smell is reminiscent of snuff, perhaps. I could not place it. Doctor, should I wish to borrow this piece of clothing, would it be allowed? It would be returned. With permission from Inspector Lestrade, of course. I do not need it for my report. This is very conclusive about his fall, the impact to his body, I mean. The reasons for it all I leave to others. Regatta smiled at Holmes. We walked another long way to the offices of the city's detectives, and saw Lestrade and his colleagues in the ample and seemingly more professional offices of Scotland Yard than the last time I had visited them. All right, Mr. Holmes, I'll give you your own on this clothing business, but you promise to include me in on any conclusions you may make. Lestrade reiterated his earlier expectations. You will be first, I report, to should I have a fresh contribution to make, if any. But so far there is little to go on. I will tell you straight off, as a measure of good faith, despite the mundane aspect of what happened to the watchman last night, there includes in this matter a puzzle of some unique quality. Why enter the building site to cause this man harm, or lure him out of his stronghold? For indeed, Danders did his work on grounds entirely protected. To what purpose do you put the life of a watchman in danger? Certainly not to pilfer, and there was no theft, as while I was on the grounds of the construction, there was no check in the workmen fulfilling their jobs. 2 men verified this when I queried them over the state of the tools and materials, which had been left as they were since yesterday at end of day. If Dandas was got at outside of his keep, as it were, when attacked, why do with his body as was done? Why the unusual smell on this piece of uniform? I do not like where the wood has been piled in front. Using the keys, the way Ellis Dandas was required to use them, was foolish when it came to pure security. Would you like to share any of your thoughts with me on these matters, so our discoveries are reciprocal to one another? You and I are not on the same trails in the least, Mr. Holmes. Dandas was followed by person or persons unknown and thrown off of the bridge, probably because he followed the wrong people, or he was ambushed for some reason or another, out of fear that he was about to alert someone about something. But there is one thing both of us have in common. We both want to understand why the Waterloo is part of all of this. It is a fair piece of walking from the theatre and the hotel construction site. Holmes said, "You misinterpreted my concern over the bridge, as I asked, why do with his body as was done? Why throw or drop his body in the first place?" You are off the scent from the start, Mr. Holmes. This is a plain matter, and there's little need to make it greater than may be, Lestrade pronounced sonorously. Off the scent, well, we'll see about that, said Holmes, as an aside to me as we made our way out to the public streets. We hailed a cab, and I was back in my old lodgings with Holmes, while he busied himself with letters of some kind, before handing 3 to Mrs. Hudson, telling her they had to go out immediately. It was 2:30, and I graciously accepted some of his tobacco in the pipe I had left on the mantel for its occasional use. You gave Lestrade a list of things to keep his mind in a twist. Was that on purpose, or is there full reality behind what he thought to be your usual interest in the esoteric? Oh, Holmes proclaimed, complete honesty in the line where my thoughts have been placed. I gave him all he needed to know if he wishes to keep up with me. I openly stated where I will concentrate my resources. The construction site and the wood pile? I asked Holmes. That is interesting, is it now? Answered Holmes. Quite an ugly duckling amidst what friend Cart probably attempts to achieve in the view of his theatre's facade. But the construction must go on, though that wood pile with its stacks of reinforcement bars and other metal pieces is a gift to any would-be trespasser. How so? One only need climb the wood pile, and one finds oneself just above the fencing. And dropping down into the site is easier than climbing back above it. And for some of the other parts, I mentioned about the rules of the keys and the locks. They're nothing more than an announcement to any lurker with designs on penetrating the site's defences. By following these rules, one may as well shout, "Here I am, you have such and such time to go to another place and do mischief. My next use of key and lock will alert you to my new location." A rather counterintuitive manoeuvre on the part of Stanley Howard. I spent a moment with my pipe, and Holmes joined me. "There is little to do, my friend," said he, "until we have word on our messages." These came after a good hour, during which the uniform tunic arrived and was placed to one side by Holmes. The best of the news for which I have sent comes first. Toby will be brought to the curb here at Baker Street. Sherman is sending a man as he cannot come himself. I cannot afford the time to travel to Lambeth. This other message means Mr. Richard will be along shortly. You may choose to take notes with the greatest of care. Holmes's eyes twinkled. Some minutes later the usher entered. He had removed his hat and Holmes had not offered him a chair. Perhaps Holmes was chafing from the cool reception he had received from the man before him when he, Holmes, met him in the lobby of the Savoy. "Tell me about last night and why you either stayed around the theatre after the performance, or what would have been even more intriguing, why you went home, had your supper, gone to bed, or milled around, and then went to the construction site to see Dandas." The usher stood in the room, and the colour left his cheeks. There was a pause, but he knew he had given away a good deal by his reaction, and he took a breath before making his statement. "You see, Mr. Holmes, I have been reprimanded by Mr. Howard for what has been thought of as my meddling in the business of others at the Savoy. My intentions there have always been good service, but I suppose I should accept that I have a prying mind, and if I believe there is something strange, I make it my business to discover what may be. A previous instance of reporting such conduct brought me no benefit, and only a scolding. So I keep to myself." "Yes, but in keeping to yourself, you still play the part of my line of work," said Holmes. "You play at detective yourself." "How did you know, Mr. Holmes?" the man asked plainly. "Well, besides your interest in being in places that cannot possibly mean anything to your employment, the lower edges of your pant cuffs and the heels of your shoes, inasmuch as one can observe them, show you to have been very interested in the wood pile near the front entry. You've even stood on the pile of wood and metal bars. Did you enter the yard?" "No. Though it is true I have been checking up on Danders, I did not enter the yard, but stayed on the outside of the fence. There was something queer with him. He had become strange and, well, secretive about his post. Any question about it brought from him an unnecessary anger." There was a pause, and then Holmes said to him, "I don't believe you will be viewed in a negative way under these circumstances, should you make a report to me that you interested yourself in a fellow employee's movements. Pray continue." "I did not go home. I had dinner at Allen's, the round-the-clock restaurant many in the trains and security jobs go to for a meal. I was there for more than an hour. By the time I got back to the Savoy, it was during mid-performance. The actors who spilled out to the rear of the theatre were there, of course, as they always are. But they remained near to the theatre and nowhere near the construction gate. I walked quietly to see where I might find Danders, and I saw him, walking about the construction yard and muttering to himself as he had done so now and then." "Do you remember the words he spoke?" Holmes asked. "Naturally. It was the usual nonsense he'd been going on about for several months now. Not every night, mind you, but now and again." "Wait a moment," Holmes interrupted him. "Would you guess that there was a natural, measurable interval between the nights Danders would make these speeches to himself?" "I don't quite understand that," the usher replied in a cloudy manner. Holmes thought for a moment. "Why wasn't he doing this muttering often? That is, nearly each time you spied on him?" Richard pondered this for some seconds. "Maybe, Mr. Holmes. I can't count it, but it did seem it was always weeks apart." While saying what he said, the usher's mind seemed to be reaching for something beyond where we were in the sitting room. "Tell me some of the words he muttered, Mr. Richard," said my friend to our guest. "Nonsense, I promise you. He went on about the moon. He said words about the night sky and stars, the pyramid in Rivers du Sud, the pyramid. He went on and on, this Rivers business. He said the word do with Rivers and Sud as well. Peppers and the pyramid. He always said these things. This time he added new words. He talked about some woman, the woman with the parasol." Holmes took all of this in, and as he listened his eyes widened, and for a moment I had the rare experience of watching him take in the concept of being surprised. "Go on about this, Richard," Holmes said. "Give me details about the new words." "He was going mad, Mr. Holmes. He always talked about his pyramid, but this time he talked about it being attacked, and again about this woman and the parasol and the fire. This was a new thing, about the attack. Also the woman and parasol and the fire were new. He had mentioned the moon and the rivers many times over the past months. The night and the pyramid and the moon were primarily on his mind each of these evenings. He would mutter to himself. Africa also. Peppers sometimes, night sky, moon. But parasol and fire were not a usual reference, nor was woman, nor was the attack. Then he ran away toward the construction area, and I immediately left. Holmes asked no more of Richard, and after he was dismissed, a few minutes later Mrs. Hudson came into the living room, and after greeting me told Holmes that waiting in the street was a man with a dog. Holmes asked if I still had time to join him, or was I expected back at my home for any responsibility. I told him my time was allocated to his needs for the rest of the day, and he said this was what he had hoped. We took a four-wheeler along with the handler's assistant and Toby, who barely registered the ride, or Holmes and I as his new companions. Things were quite different after we all arrived at the Savoy. Holmes gave the handler's assistant a half-crown to enjoy some supper and asked him to return in an hour's time. We were met by Stanley Howard. "I need access to the outdoor site areas, Mr. Howard. Please make unlocked the several fences that may prevent movement through these places." "Naturally, yes, but your choosing to walk your dog while you do your work is a rather interesting business. Very different work habits than how your friend here describes you in his stories." Howard left us to comply with Holmes's instructions, and we went about having Toby sniff Dander's uniform tunic now and then, while Holmes walked him along the edge of the Savoy's newly expanded property line, and generally any place outside the edge of it where the watchman may have visited. We came to the gates that were now unlocked by the supervisor, could see from afar the various cast members and crew who were entering the theatre from the double rear doors, now fully opened and light shining out into the open area behind the building. The dark mattered not to Toby, who did his job with his nose at the ground as Holmes walked him forward. It was nearing 8 o'clock when the sound of the orchestra penetrated through the theatre and sounded to all points of the property, and perhaps beyond. I understood it would have to be the opening overture for the new work of Gilbert and Sullivan. At that same time, Holmes, satisfied with Toby's work on the dirt ground, led the dog to round the circumference of what would be the hotel proper. When we came to the stairs, Holmes kindly lifted Toby to each new level, and he was taken to what would be the landings for each floor. I looked past the end of the framing toward the river and the strip of foliage that skirted the Victoria Embankment. Richard Cart's guests would certainly enjoy some impressive views. It was when Holmes lifted Toby up to the landing of the 8th floor that Dog became interested. His reaction to being at this landing was more than at any other time during the past half hour. Holmes understood this and took Toby on a walk to the wood floor itself. Soon we came to a large rectangular box shape of wood that caused Toby to more than check his movements. He stopped and sniffed around this. The box had the word "fire" written on it, and it was a large cabinet that probably measured 8 feet in height, with a width of 6 feet and a depth of 4. It had 2 kissing doors down its length from top to bottom, and these doors had no locks of any kind. The unfinished wood was not of the same quality as the unfinished lumber that made up the structure of the building, a poorer grade. This is one of the boxes put in place in case of fire. We've seen them on every flight, all at this place in relation to each of the floors, where they have been set, Holmes stated. He opened it, and we saw some bags of sand and a drum marked water and 4 pails. "My guess is that this is more or less standard for each of these," he stated. As we stood and took in the contents of the box, Toby became erratic, with a fit of genuine desire to get his nose into this now opened wood cabinet. He sniffed wildly at the firebox, and his tail wagged as though it were a machine turned on to its greatest power position. "We are here," said Holmes, noticing and taking from one of the cracks in the wood a piece of something that looked to be organic. Holmes showed it to Toby, a few inches of yellow that he held tightly, so Toby would not take it into one of his nostrils. That was proof enough for Holmes. He took the dog to the 9th and 10th floors, and to the similar firebox we found on those floors, and then back down to the 7th and 6th. It is that firebox, and only that firebox, which interested our unfortunate Danders, said Holmes. And this sliver of plant will hold the key to why he made this place the centre of his interest. Our work is done for the evening, though I have much to do through the night and tomorrow morning. But we can get you back to the good Mrs. Watson, of whom I am into some amount of debt, allowing me so much of the time of her bridegroom. We returned Toby to the handler's assistant, and Holmes paid some money over to him to give to Toby's owner, Sherman. He joined me in a cab, and we went first to Baker Street, where he alighted, giving the driver instructions to take me home. I didn't hear from him until the following afternoon. A message came to me after lunch, and Holmes asked me whether I could spare some time during the evening hours at about 7:30, and whether I could meet with him at the Savoy. Specifically, the back door near to where the theatre meets the hotel's construction. I wrote back that I could do better and could meet him at Baker Street as early as 4 that afternoon. I arrived to find him in the grip of excitement over some papers in his hand. He waved me in to take my usual chair. He took up each of them, one after the other. Here is the chemical analysis of that piece of plant from inside the firebox, which Toby had led us to find, matching the same scent that was on Dander's uniform. I had to consult my reference book on the subject of plants and their uses. I had my notion verified by Professor Baylor, who is an expert at the National Museum and who directs the botanical gardens. It is a pepper found in Africa, chiefly used throughout the culinary world in the preparation of spicy dishes. In many cases, dishes that gourmets appreciate. You remember Foster, the young man I've mentioned before who I occasionally run into at Hyde Park playing impromptu games of chess. He's a member of the Garrick Club, and he was kind enough to speak with one of their chefs. There is no doubt about it. This pepper is from Guinea and has its base in Paradol. Look into my microscope if you wish to view it. I don't understand, said I. Is it your idea that Dander's transferred the pepper from the firebox to his uniform? It is a unique mystery, is it not? In fact, the relationship between the pepper or peppers, as we shall presume there was more than one, and why his uniform was covered with the scent of Paradol, leads to only one plausible explanation. Paradol, I interjected. Parasol, one of the words Richard reported Dander's had said to him under his delusion. Holmes reacted to my comment with some interest, but he was clearly holding something back from me. At any rate, Watson, there is still more. Matters become more intriguing after you read the following. Holmes handed me a note which had a heading that stated it was from a report prepared by Dr. Regatta at the Met. The portion of the report read, Dander's lunchbox, which was found at the Workman and Watchman kiosk, included a vacuum flask of tea with a second compartment in its lower section, which would appear to be hidden. It is understood to be a double flask, popular with those who would choose to conceal a secondary beverage to secretly drink from when surrounded by others in a public setting. These are popular at horse meetings and races, and in some cases picnics and outings. However, in this case, the secondary compartment did not contain an alcoholic beverage, but had in it more tea, but tea that was laced with mushroom, the kind used by those seeking a hallucinogenic experience. A puzzle built into another puzzle, Watson. From where did the tainted tea come? From where did the peppers come? Is there a connection between the two? And more interestingly, is there a connection between these facts and the untimely death of Dander's? My head was spinning over the unusual situation set before us, but I didn't have to wait long before Holmes had an idea that to him made sense, though I felt it on the side of weird. Let us presuppose the simplest understanding that the peppers in the firebox and the secret section in the vacuum flask were both due to the actions of Dander's. It's the most logical interpretation of the facts, and I have always held the maxim that the simplest explanation, unless disturbed by a turn of events, is the truth. And in this case, we have no other reasoning before us but this idea. Do you remember Richard's statement that Dander's appeared to babble about strange thoughts? That is the side effect when one boils and ingests mushrooms of this kind with tea. I am not familiar with the mushrooms of which you speak, I said. They were popular with Vikings who would eat them intentionally to create in their minds a mania. These Vikings were called during the moments of their use berserkers, while fighting under the influence of the mushrooms, and the term evolved into one of the words in use for anyone acting in a wild manner. So it's your conjecture that this was some scheme designed by Dander's himself? Exactly. Dander's took the mushroom tea, and Richard, as he had done in the past, fell upon Dander's while he was under their influence. Dander's made his incoherent phrases to Richard about whatever it was he fancied, and these phrases also included the mentioning of the peppers. How so the peppers? Holmes looked into his mind for a moment. Because he wanted them there, and the only answer to that which I can fathom is that he enjoyed their scent, and this demonstrates an interest Dander's had in expanding the enjoyment of his senses. And from that you deduce? There's nothing more to deduce. It is an end to itself. said Holmes. "But then what is our next step in investigating Dander's murder?" Yes, the murder, and the reason for it, and where Dander's was when he was killed, and the purpose in placing the body under the Waterloo. And do you have any answers to these? The only lead we have is for us, ourselves, to enter the world of Dander's, from which he was removed, the construction site during the late hours. This is where we must find ourselves. And tonight, if you can find the time, to join me there. Indeed, I can, I assured my friend. It was 9 o'clock when we found ourselves again at the Savoy, but this time as we watched the rear door of the Opera House. From our position on the 8th floor of the hotel's construction, we could see a very busy group of actors, using the area outside the doors as a respite and place to smoke or simply enjoy the fresh air. We revisited the firebox. Holmes grabbed hold of it and gave it a pull, and to my surprise, it lifted upward and off its bottom. This did not surprise my friend. It gave way easily, and Holmes, by himself, was able to turn it until it rested lengthwise along the bare wood where we were standing. After this, Holmes turned it again, but this time on its opposite axis, so that the opening faced away from us. Notice how the sides of this firebox can be removed and turned about easily by one man. Its contents of pails, water and sand stay behind with its bottom. The 8th floor firebox here is a free structure that one man, Dander's, was able to manipulate and place just as I have done. And here we have it, Dander's Paradol Chamber, where he could enjoy his world of rivers, or rivers du Suc, as a proper noun to be correct. His view would be, as you can see for yourself, that of the Thames. Holmes found me with one of the most puzzled expressions I had ever shown to him. "You think I am as nonsensical as our departed night watchman?" He smiled to me, rubbing his hands together and looking down at what had become an enclosure, if his speculation fit the facts. "But to go to such lengths," I said, "just as your patients did so in visiting you this week. Last year's terrible storm of snow has all Londoners thinking of the worst possible outcomes for this current January, so why not Dander's as well, when it comes to the enjoyment of his journey?" His journey? Just that. Holmes looked down and then up at the piece of Thames we could see from our vantage point. He lay down, not choosing to fit himself into the structure, but instead placing himself beside it. "What are the rivers du Suc?" Looking out at the embankment and the river, Holmes answered, "They are not rivers per se, but a section of Guyana in Africa controlled by France. In fact, they are the very province where the Paradol peppers grow, and from where they are harvested." Holmes stood up. "I understand part of the reasoning for what happened here, but not all. For the rest, we will have to see what happens." Together we walked about the 8th floor until Holmes was satisfied. He found a place where we could wait and not be seen. Completed wood walls on the riverside of the massive construction, but with sections of openings and a pile of lumber between us and those who we might see at the open area beside the rear of the theatre. "We can risk this, I think," he said, producing 2 cigars. "Build yourself a version of some kind of chair, and you face the theatre and eye the river, and in such a way that we can look at one another." It was 9:15 when I nudged Holmes, and he turned around to find what clearly appeared to be a woman in a beautiful dress that appeared to be a theatrical costume. She had separated herself from the small number of other actors at the back door, and was walking toward the construction site with a parasol in her hand. Eventually she turned and walked away from the theatre and hotel's construction. A moment later she was walking toward the embankment. So, Watson, there is indeed a genuine parasol for which Dander's could refer, as well as his chamber he lined with Paradol. That scotched me for some time. Coincidence is the bane of the reasoned mind. It can rescue you from a host of inconsistencies, but it can also set you up a new problem with leads that go nowhere. "Why the parasol? Why, in fact, the costume?" I asked. "We shall have to see about that," he whispered. "For the time being, we will operate that she is an actress on an errand of which time will not allow her to change out of her costume." The woman had walked a long path around to a portion of the embankment that was of a low grade and kind to the pedestrian. Ending her walk, there she stood. She was nearly on a direct line from our view, and in her costume the vision of her was itself theatrical. Though her back was to us, we could see her opened parasol outstretched in one hand, and some type of illuminated device that allowed her to hold actual fire in the other. To our right, and along the edge of the water, came a small steamboat. It was no more than 20 feet. Its engine's noise puttered quietly as it approached the concrete where the woman stood, very close to the Queen's Needle, which happened to be situated at the section she chose to be at. At that moment Holmes said with some urgency, "Watson, quickly, follow me." Down we went to the ground floor. Enter the backstage and find Cart. Tell him, and only him, to leave wherever he is and to walk outside and discover who the woman is who has left the theatre. No doubt she'll have to return. Under no circumstance is he to assign another to this task, only himself. Make yourself scarce by going home, but tell Cart I need her name sent to me at Baker Street before noon tomorrow. Tell him not to raise any suspicion and not to further seek out anything from her in any way. I want a name, I want it from him alone, and nothing more. I left my friend immediately and did as he instructed. Finding D'Oyly Cart was a simpler matter than expected, and I was brought to his presence at the other side of the stage by means of the back curtain. I found him wrapped in thought, worrying over what must have been the changes to the opera, and how the cast was handling their new lines and songs for this performance. "Please come with me," I said to him, and he followed me back the way I had come, and we were soon outside and walking some distance from the back door. I told him what Holmes wanted him to do, and he said to me he well knew who the actress was, though he wasn't aware that she took a definite walk away from the rear area of the opera house during the performance. "I can tell you who this is, Dr. Watson," he spoke quietly. "But you are certain she is gone?" Holmes and I saw her walk down a path to the edge of the embankment below. I pointed toward the trees to where behind them would be the lower concrete area skirting the edge of the Thames. "This is a surprise and not at all acceptable." Cart was indignant. "Holmes wants you to do nothing about it whatsoever, but send to him information in a secure manner to Baker Street about any particulars you have of her. He only wanted a name, but if you can spend tomorrow morning preparing a summary of her history at your company, and anything else you may know about her, my errand will have been successful." "I understand and will do this without alerting anyone in my office," Cart said. "But how is this in aid of his investigation of the Dander's murder?" "Holmes has his methods, and you are in good hands supplying his needs without wonder at their purpose." "I shall do as you say," he said. We shook hands and he walked quickly back to the door, and I walked forward to the front of the theatre and found a cab to take me home. It was at 7 the following evening I found myself at Baker Street, and in Holmes's sitting room were Inspector Lestrade, Sergeant Randall, a constable, and another man. "Here is Dr. Watson," Holmes told those assembled, "and here, Watson, is Martin Thomas Smythe of the Parks Division of the City Council, and we may begin. We are dealing with at least 2 people, and most probably a few others, who are responsible for the death of one man, and in a strange connection, perhaps, liable for the deaths of another 6, though proving that would be nearly impossible at this point in time. My point being that our adversaries are treating this as very serious business. Holmes had captured the attention of us all. Smythe had not been known to me until this evening, though no doubt many of the pleasantries associated with my walks through the public parks and Crown properties made available for all to enjoy were due to this man's care. Smythe was a thin and pale man whose dark tweed suit hung on his body more than wore on it. He was nervous and appeared as if he felt out of place with the rest of us. Holmes went on, "I know everything but the motive behind our adversaries. They are careful, daring people. The prize they seek is outstanding, and whether they will attempt their goal tonight versus another night is hard to tell. But we must act as though tonight is the night. Charisse Orana and her brother Orman are attempting, for whatever purposes it serves themselves, to destroy the Cleopatra Needle. The room went silent, but the silence could be felt as though it were a presence itself. They attempted to do this 2 nights ago, and their attempt to do so again is as certain as life itself. Mr. Holmes, this is true? Smythe asked with some passion as shock came over his face. Danvers observed them during their preparations to bring harm to the Needle 2 nights ago. He lay on the 8th floor of what will one day be the Savoy Hotel, in a firebox partly altered for him to enjoy tea laced with mushroom and the scent of Paradol peppers from Guinea, as he had done on various evenings. Because Mr. Richard of the Savoy stated this occurred every few weeks, we will surmise for the purposes of discussion that he did this on the full moon, though Richard probably never connected the one event with the other. Danvers, enjoying the tea, placed himself in a hallucinatory state while taking in the scent of the African peppers, surrounding himself with his makeshift chamber of a wooden box that guarded him from harsh weather. There he relished his view of the river and his beloved pyramid. His pyramid, Lestrade interjected. When? Holmes answered. One is on the 8th floor of the future Savoy Hotel, and one looks out onto the Thames. The view through the trees is that of the top of the Needle, and the apex of that structure, seen from the perspective where he was situated, allowed him to take in the view of a pyramid on the water. The quiet was broken by Smythe. Yes, that is so, but only in the unique circumstances you describe, Mr. Holmes. One would not think of it that way as a general idea, but you have a correct understanding of what Mr. Danvers would have viewed, at least in an imaginative point of view. The full moon, the drug, the night's allure to his imagination, these all aided him in his desire to take a trip within his mind to a fictional setting based on actual elements that exist in the real world. And most importantly to his dreams was the pyramid that he loved, and he saw it being attacked. The presumption is that seeing this attack, he left his place of comfort and security, went downstairs, and moved near to the embankment to see better how such an attack was being perpetrated. His doing this brought discovery from at least one of the two. Danvers ran back inside of his keep, and at that time along came the usher Richard, who listened to Danvers' usual babbling about the night, but this time with some new words and phrases that Danvers, until that evening, had never included in his incoherent and drug-altered state. After Richard left, a frightened Danvers began to climb the unfinished stairs of the hotel. How many flights he climbed, to where he climbed, it was high enough that when Orman Orana caught up with him, the height of his being knocked from the structure was enough to kill him. Orman Orana used the wood pile adjacent to the construction area to climb over the fence. He dropped into the enclosure, went up the several flights, and confronted Danvers before pushing him off one of the unfinished floors. And Danvers, in his hallucinatory state, or because of how he was pushed, or a combination of both, fell horizontally and was killed on impact, especially since the breaking of his neck was involved. Orman Orana went back down to the body of Danvers, took from him his keys, and used them to unlock and relock the rear gate. He carried the body to the sand below Waterloo Bridge and placed it there. He then took a long jump to the hard-packed dirt that runs close to the bridge's support, walked backward to the footpath leading to the bridge, and made his escape after setting the stage to make the plausible conclusion that Danvers was either tossed over or fell from the bridge and had an awkward and uncorrected fall to his death. The basis of your wild idea, Mr. Holmes, is beyond reason, said Lestrade. 2 people cannot bring about the destruction of the Needle. Bringing such equipment and the noise caused by its use would alert even the very few who would be near it during that time of night. Yes, Smythe said in aid of Lestrade's opinion. There is no such way the obelisk could be harmed. It is great and solid. Lestrade was at a loss for any argument against Holmes's deductions. Mr. Holmes, what are your proofs against this pair? He asked. The Olga which left Alexandria in Egypt some 10 years ago had on its manifest the names Shariz Orana in second class and Orman of the same surname in third class. Attached to the Olga was the Cleopatra, a great casing upon a pontoon, designed specifically to house and carry over water what came to be called the London Cleopatra's Needle, but what was originally in ancient times one of two obelisks commanded to be erected by Thutmose III for Heliopolis, a city that predates the great Egyptian kingdoms. Heliopolis is now a portion of Cairo, and as you will all recall, one of these two obelisks was gifted to the United Kingdom by the late Muhammad Ali, ruler of Egypt and Sudan, though that was some time ago, earlier this century, and the gift stayed in Egypt waiting for the British Treasury to find the funds to bring it over. Twice the Bank of England argued that funds were available for the monument's transport, but the bank's opinion was rebuked. For this reason, it remained an embarrassment buried in Egypt, a gift without transport or a final destination here at home. Yes, that was the case, said Smythe. The Americans had a similar problem very recently with a colossal gifted them by France. The United States government spent most of this decade organizing funds for its location and the construction of a pedestal for it. But the Americans moved too slowly on this, and when the pieces of this massive female, statue, lighthouse, what have you, arrived in New York Harbor, they were taken from the ship on which they had been transported from France to the United States and laid on the grounds of a former island military fortress just inside the harbor. Only last year was the pedestal completed with money from donor fundraising, and the colossal was mounted on top of it. Just as the Franco-American statue's pedestal was paid for by private funds, the obelisk's movement from Egypt to our land was paid for by a peer, Sir Erasmus Wilson, who passed a few years ago. I attended his funeral. Smythe gave his final words with a touch of emotion. Yes, said Holmes. He was pleased someone of importance could contribute to his construe. I suspected Smythe might give a better lecture on the subject of the Needle's story, past and present, than Holmes. But he didn't interrupt the case Holmes was laying before us. Smythe's worry over the affair had grown with every note of discussion the detective presented. But the private action of Sir Erasmus met with tragedy, or foul play, or both, continued Holmes. The casing that fitted around the obelisk was placed on a pontoon, and this craft came to be called the Cleopatra. It had its own captain and crew, and was held attached to the Olga. During the voyage, a powerful storm loosed the Cleopatra from the Olga, and the Cleopatra capsized, and 6 of its men drowned. The Cleopatra was given up, and the Olga continued its voyage to England. Eventually, the Cleopatra pontoon was found intact by seamen of either another ship or port. There was some argument over a salvage award to those who had found and kept the Cleopatra, but after some payment was made and the obelisk was shown to be intact, it made its way to our shores and was eventually erected where it is now, on the Victoria Embankment and very close to the Savoy. Was the fastening of the Cleopatra pontoon sabotaged by Orman Orana? The storm in the Bay of Biscay was logged by the captain of the Olga as being responsible for the Cleopatra's separation from that ship and its rolling on the severe seas. But did the Orana brother assist this separation from the Olga in any way? This is beyond any real deductive process. And we are then left with what, Mr. Holmes? Asked Lestrade. Suspicion, was my friend's answer, but a suspicion which ties the Oranas to the Needle. And when you add to this suspicion their meeting last night at the Needle itself, as Dr. Watson and I can attest, we have at least enough to spend our resources on mounting an effort to protect it. Yes, interjected Smythe, this we must do in the marshalling of whoever can be ordered to serve this cause. The Needle must be protected. Lestrade had for some time given my friend his due in this expository presentation, but at the moment Holmes had come to where he believed the Needle to be threatened, Lestrade ended his indulging Holmes's amazing idea. Suppose we take your idea as possible, Mr. Holmes. Are we to mobilize how many of the constabulary to where? And to achieve what end? 2 or 5 people are going to meet at the Needle and orchestrate its destruction. We are to apprehend them and afterward arrest them for a crime of intent to cause mischief, or, if we're more fortunate, and observe them doing something else, for an attempt to destroy Crown property. There will be on their person no heavy machinery to prove your theories, Mr. Holmes, and theories would be the appropriate word. I am one of the Yard who has been your supporter before the professional investigators, though you are often laughed at for placing your imagination before tried and established methods. This time, however, you have shown yourself to be a bird of that colour. I do not believe, Lestrade, the Aranas have any more than themselves, and perhaps another tight group who will at a point in time render assistance to them. Orman Arana uses a small steamboat, the Ginny, which is a 24-footer with a small engine. But the Ginny's engine produces no force which could do any damage to the Needle. And from what I could see, there was nothing on board the Ginny that could be used to bring harm to the Needle. But Dandas believed the Needle to be attacked merely by only the two of them on the embankment itself, and with no relation to the steamboat. There must, therefore, have been an act, separate from the steamboat's presence, which demonstrated to Dandas a means for bringing harm to the obelisk. I believe we are large enough of a contingent to prevent their scheme once it is discovered. Yet I confess I do not understand it at this juncture. What is needed is vigilance. They will have their nightly rendezvous on the Victoria Embankment, and we should be ready for them. We only need watch quietly from a discreet distance. I will play the game under your direction, Lestrade. I'm inclined to agree with Mr. Smythe that the Needle must be protected. Smythe gave him a sincere nod of the head, but in doing so, it should be by your plan and our taking your orders. At least Holmes had won over Smythe, and Inspector Lestrade was not only mollified by Holmes's typical disinterest in credit, he also had the political savvy to comprehend to whom Smythe reported. For though Smythe was, like he, under municipal employ, Smythe's protectors would ultimately include a royal person who would remember whether Scotland Yard did what it could to prevent a loss to Crown property, and the Needle had become a popular place for Londoners to observe, to gather around and to enjoy as part of a walk on the embankment. Its loss to the city would be immeasurable. But before we leave on our mission, I have to share with you this last piece of news. Holmes said to us, "I am worried about the one and only thing I overheard the brother say to his sister last night. He had left his small craft and had stood on the concrete by the water's edge, while she stood by the Needle's side. Most parts of their conversation were too quiet for me to hear. I tried to get close without being seen by them. Watson had left me to find Richard Doyley Cart and learn the identity of the woman with the parasol, and I had made my way out of the construction grounds and had slid down the planted area to get near to their conversation. They spent their time looking upward at the obelisk, regarding it, and to me it reinforced the notion that the reason they were there had to do with the Needle, and, as Dandas viewed it, their attack on it. And while this happened, the brother shouted out the words, "The City of London." I tell you this because I am worried that there would be some kind of diversion to take the attention from any who might be near the embankment at the area of the Needle. Such a diversion would most probably be on the Strand above. Should their scheme require a destructive distraction, it might make things go bad for any innocent people in the city, and especially near the Savoy. And with that last fearful worry, we made our plans for the evening. We left Baker Street in a four-wheeler for myself, Lestrade, Smythe and Holmes, and following us in a hansom were the two men in uniform. Our destination was the Opera House, but halfway during our journey Holmes bolted upright in his seat, told me to continue on and follow our plan, and then he jumped from the cab and disappeared into the night. Smythe was in shock, Lestrade less so. Such was Smythe's introduction to Sherlock Holmes. We were in two groups, each camped out on the small rise above the embankment, hidden in the foliage as best we could be. I was with Smythe and a constable, and Lestrade and Sergeant Randall were some hundreds of feet away on a similar height, though closer to the Waterloo. The Gilbert and Sullivan show was underway, and I looked down at the cement surround built for the Egyptian monument. Orman Arana's small boat moved along the water's edge, perhaps alerted by the fire his sister was able to hold in her hand, as we immediately saw Charise Arana appear on our right, wearing her costume dress and holding in her other hand her parasol. The brother climbed up and onto the concrete, and we watched as he busied himself with a combination of leather, ropes, and chains, which all appeared to be bound together in some way. With the assistance of Shari's Orana, he attached to his body what we all understood at that moment to be a harness of some kind. He cinched it hard against his body and moved to the base of the obelisk. With the swift movements of a steeplejack, he climbed up to the 2/3 high point of the monument. He wrapped a portion of rope and chain around this upper section of the needle and pulled at it to ensure it be taut. With cat-like motions, he climbed back down to the 1/3 point of the obelisk and did the same with another such rope and chain, also cinching it hard against the stone. Orman Orana then rebounded to the ground, and once he recovered from his leap, he took a moment to survey his handiwork. His sister by his side, she took his hand, and together they stepped back and looked up at the monument. He unstrapped his harness and tossed it into his boat. The 2 ropes and chain hung freely, and I noticed their length was greater than I originally thought them to be. Together we witnessed the sister and brother each take hold of an end of chain and pull it to the jinni. Orman entered the small craft with his length of rope and chain and spent a moment with it, and afterward Shari's followed suit, and handing him the second rope and chain, he did something with it as well, while she joined him in the boat. This was all we needed to understand foul play was before us, and I ran down the small hill toward the needle's base. I saw and heard Lestrade and Sergeant Randall, on my left, engaged in a similar charge. Though the small steamboat's engine power and light motive force would hardly be a threat to the needle, the completed actions of Shari's and Orman Orana was now an act that could be classified as an attempted crime, and Lestrade would be able to bring upon them the full weight of the law. Our timing had been perfect, and despite his absence, Holmes had made it possible for the culprits to be caught in the act of their folly, and Crown property safeguarded. It was during my negotiating a safe pathway down the hill that I heard the sound of their boat's small engine rev up to a greater power, and as we all arrived at the surround of the monument, we saw the boat slowly move away. Lestrade merely shook his head at what he saw before him. This is a pathetic end to what Mr. Holmes had too much bother over. These two are in for a fix. What have they accomplished? The power they make cannot pull over a wooden structure, let alone this piece of stone. I agree with you, said I. This makes no sense at all. The ropes, said Sergeant Randall. Shall I master them in some way? Yes, Sergeant, please do so, Lestrade responded. Randall looked about him. We all did so. We saw nothing immediate to our cause. Dorister, Lestrade spoke to the other constable, get on along and alert the harbour master of our problem. Let's see if we can place the brother and sister in capture before they make their way to some safety. Sir, said Dorister, they're nearly stopped there at only a few 100 feet out. Why aren't they building speed? They aren't making sense. They're spending more time looking at us than making their way into the deep water. I saw for myself that Dorister was correct. The Oranas hardly moved, but I did notice they were doing something. Lestrade, what do you make of them? What are they up to? It was Sergeant Randall who spoke from the higher point at the base of the needle. Inspector, they have more rope on board their boat. What's that, Sergeant? In their craft, that man has more rope. The constable Dorister looked at the ropes attached to the obelisk that made their way over the edge of the embankment and into the water. He shouted, The ropes! Fasten them down now! Lestrade and I looked about us, but there was nothing on the embankment's concrete. Over the edge in the water was also nothing. We were surrounded by a park setting, a slab of concrete and water, nothing more. I picked up one of the ropes. One end of it led behind me and up to the needle, and the other into the water before me. Lestrade held the other. We each looked above us and then out to the water, attempting to understand the situation and Dorister's fear. At that moment, the small boat's engine finally gave the sound of its full power, and from their place the boat moved into the deep Thames, and the rope in my hand began to jump. First in a small way, and then with a definite tug. Let go of it, shouted Dorister. I did so, as did Lestrade. Immediately the ropes bounced upward and bowed before us. The bow became an arc, and the arc a loose line. For some seconds we could grasp at the ropes and pull on them, but this was to no avail. Lestrade and Randall took hold of one of them in full, and together, using their combined weight and strength as best they could, they attempted to tame the rope. But as the boat continued its movement, the ropes became taut and impossible to manage. An instant later there was no slack in either rope whatsoever, and due to their attachment to the needle at some height, they slowly became fully out of our reach. Then, something unexpected. A steam paddle tug moved from the heart of the river, correcting its navigation toward where we stood. It had come seemingly out of nowhere, and I was glad to see Lestrade had taken matters more seriously than I had given him credit. But I thought again. "Lestrade, what do you know of that tug?" I said to him. "Nothing." I took a moment to look at the obelisk above my head, to see the 2 ropes and chains run from portions of the needle down to the boat that was now making its way to the tug. A strange, surreal vision formed in my mind, and my heart held a fear I rarely experienced. The tug had not appeared due to the coordination of Lestrade, but was there to serve as a mighty force to pull and break the solid stone. Motive force was the weapon the Aranas had chosen to achieve their plan. The tug would create a power of an unknown consequence, but one that would certainly be devastating. "What will they do?" Lestrade shouted at us. Sergeant Randall answered, "They will connect the ropes tied around the needle and somehow attach them to the tug. They will transfer them to the Samson posts that are attached inside the tug." It was the most impossible circumstance I had ever witnessed. There were the ropes and chains, and there were the Aranas on their small steamboat making its way to the side ladder that was a permanent part of the tug. A man had come from the deck to the top of the ladder, and then another. They took from Orman Arana the 2 ends of ropes and eventually pulled them into the tug. Orman then completed his climb and rolled himself into the tugboat. After this, Charis Arana left the boat and herself climbed up to the top edge of the paddle steamer. She looked out of place doing all of this in her costume, but there she was being lifted over the edge of the tug by the 2 men, and in a moment she too was on board. I was frozen in horror. Sergeant Randall had to be correct that they would fit the ends of the ropes to 2 of the tug's Samson posts, or something similar used by tugs to do their work, and we would watch as the tug moved further away and under its full speed. The ropes and chains would then tense, and we would witness a vast pulling, and the needle would break in some way, with most of the vast obelisk plummeting over the short concrete spacing into the water below. For if tugs of this kind could pull massive, seaworthy vessels, the obelisk would be dealt a certain doom. And just then, in my despair, I watched as a riot broke out on deck. Several men had overcome a smaller number of men through the force of their majority. My spirits were lifted. Someone had thrown the ropes and chains over the stern and into the river. The tug checked its speed, slowed, and weighed anchor in the shallows. The man who tossed the ropes over the deck waved to those of us by the side of Cleopatra's Needle, and from my view, I understood his shape and face to be that of Sherlock Holmes. I watched him walk the length of the tug to where the prow of the boat I read below him, the words painted on the side of the dark hull plating, City of London. Word of Lestrade's impressive and great unravelling of the Dander's murder and the saving of the monument were fast being spread by the constabulary who had participated in the adventure. Holmes had been quiet during our arrival at Scotland Yard, and knowledge of what he had done on the tug was also being shared by others. Most had believed that under the supervision of the inspector, Holmes handled himself masterfully. Once more we gathered in the new office of Inspector Lestrade, and after Charis Arana had been sent for, Holmes shared with us the full report D'Oyly Carte had sent to him of her history at the Savoy. Miss Arana had been in service to the theatre company for some years, and on occasion had been given actual minor parts with a highlight in programmes. Generally she was not well known, but she was a reliable cast member and had always appeared to have enjoyed the work. She had her circle of those she talked with backstage, but none of the women could remember her ever befriending anyone especially. Into our presence was brought Charis Arana. She was told she had the right to not speak against herself, but upon hearing this statement, she said the obvious was obvious. Further, she told us she had no intent to walk away from her brother's fate and the fate of the men who had shared their ambition. She was given a chair. As a kindness to her, all of us were seated so we did not tower over her, but instead shared a conversational semicircle around her. Where murder is concerned, the law punishes all conspirators equally for that murder. Lestrade had begun. I am sorry for the watchman. He was foolish, and that is not a defence. I had checked both sides of the walkway on the embankment, and all was clear. I had no idea to check the park side or up the hill, and I couldn't imagine we were being spied on from one of the floors of the hotel's construction. What was his purpose? Why did he act in the manner he did? Shahrazad was bitter as she spoke. Her hard, black eyes peered into mine for a moment. But she levelled most of her speech at Holmes. She hardly looked at Lestrade. She regarded Smythe with contempt. I am at a loss, Miss Orana, Holmes said. I cannot see a motive, especially since we have learned from your employer that you are Egyptian. You and presumably your brother have been living in England for some years, and reverence for your adopted home and your native land would, I presume, give you some investment in the Needle's maintenance. The Needle, she shouted with contempt. What a title for our national treasure. I am disgusted. I am filled with contempt for the childish whims and hypocrisies of your people. Once more she looked at Smythe as if he was the embodiment of all she hated and not an important civil servant. I assure you, Miss Orana, Smythe said in even tones, the obelisk is meant to be a reminder of the friendship between our peoples. It was given in such a spirit. Its gifting commemorates brave men and brave battles and ties Egypt and the United Kingdom together as good and noble comrades. I assure you, she replied, the obelisk is a gift given by a man who was unsuited for our nation's leadership. He was a conqueror more than he was the innovator he has been represented to be, a pure dictator, and history will one day bear this out. The reason your governments have supported him was his standing by your country's schemes that have turned many in the world into puppets of British rule. But any statement I may make has little to do with my politics related to the late Khedive Ali Pasha. My passion, and the passion of my brother, is for the view that was held by our father and his father. Our grandfather remembered the Ali's so-called gifting of the pair of obelisks to your country and to the United States. A third that stood at Luxor Temple was gifted to France. Our father and grandfather were disgusted. Their interest was that the great symbols of our history should not be given over to any outside power, regardless of the reason. This is an absurdity nearly singular to Egypt. It would only be made clear to you if another power, Russia or Germany, sent digging crews to places throughout Britain to uncover your past and treat you like a third-rate peoples. Leaders from these foreign nations should pay your coal workers twopence a day to dig holes throughout this island, find British treasures, and send them to St. Petersburg or Berlin, placing them on display, regardless of the importance of the role they played in this history of your society. This is less about a political goal you would assign to me and my brother, and more about dignity. And the crew of the pontoon Cleopatra, a decade ago? Lestrade put to her, 6 men drowned at the hands of your previous attempt to destroy it. There was a silence. Then Miss Orana said to him, and perhaps to all of us, speak to me only those things relevant to my arrest. And she was quiet. Fine then, miss, I shall do that. Lestrade was official. After my friend here has some words with you. He looked at Holmes, as did Miss Orana. I know you well, she said to Holmes, and with a less vitriolic tone than from a moment ago. There are many magazines and reading materials backstage at the Savoy. Your doings are well discussed, especially by the young men of our company. 2 or 3 have made asides that William Gilbert write songs for you, and that there be a Sherlock Holmes opera. One evening after a rehearsal, he had made a series of light and humorous lines, stanza after stanza, of you investigating something recorded in one of the stories written by your partner, and on the spot, Sullivan made for them improvised tunes. It turned into quite a party. It was a few nights before The Mikado was premiered, and Mr. Cart was in the best of moods. But they are brilliant, and we all enjoyed toying with you in a good-hearted way. Her words of this musical nonsense invented by Gilbert and Sullivan, of which he had been the subject, brought a smile to Holmes for a brief moment. And this would be Dr. Watson? She turned to me. I nodded from my chair. Holmes spoke to her. I would like to ask you some of your account related to your years here, and how you and your brother created between you this obsession to destroy the monument, Holmes said to her. You are, of course, under no obligation to have with me this conversation, as I am not affiliated with Scotland Yard. But I think it would make sense for you to speak with me. Though I do not condone the actions of you and your brother, I think I understand why you acted to do what you attempted. Was it the Bible and other Christian references that became too much for you to bear when it came to the monument's placement here in England? It was exactly that, Mr. Holmes. Yes, you mentioned whims and hypocrisies, but it was, in fact, when I saw how you and your brother planned to use ropes to take down the needle, or, to be fair to you, the Egyptian obelisk, I truly understood your motives, and I thought back to the ceremony for the erection of it on the embankment, and the list of items that were sealed into the pedestal came back to me. Yes, Mr. Holmes, she said. You understand, we have in our history our own book for the next life. I do not believe Osiris to greet me in the afterlife any more than I do the idea that Hades will do so. But can you imagine Britain gifting Egypt some relic of its Christian history, and the Egyptian government placing in its pedestal the Book of the Dead? I am not anti-Christian. I believe all religions have value to the societies which embrace them. But copies of the Bible, and a statement from it in over 200 languages, proclaiming that everlasting life comes from a source against the very obelisk itself. Yes, said Holmes, I understand. So you and your brother worked to bring it down. Why now? Why not earlier? This year was the 10th anniversary of the stones leaving Egypt and of our father's death. It in fact took years for my brother, Orman, to perfect his plan related to its destruction. He built the ropes and chains, the harness, and secured for himself his boat. The construction and practice using the harness and ropes alone took 2 years. We had studied the surround where the Heliopolis obelisk had been placed. During those years my brother became an excellent assistant stonemason, and I enjoyed my career at the Savoy. Mr. Cart was preparing me for a position related to making certain Egyptians, Syrians, Persians, and others from the region were welcomed at his hotel, as he wished to have someone like me to speak with them, and to ensure their stay was exceptional. Working for the company has been wonderful. I know you won't believe that. Holmes responded, On the contrary, I have seen many performances at the Savoy, and I suppose that means indirectly I have seen you for years. If I ever chose to work in the theatre, and don't think the notion has never been in my mind, I would enjoy very much to work at the Savoy. Shahrazad stirred for a moment in her chair. A few years for you to conceive your plan, then? Holmes prodded her. Then our uncle died, and our family in Cairo was without a head of household, and my brother left his employ here and moved there, planning on living there a year to settle matters and place a cousin as head of household. But 1 year became 2, and then more. He returned to England 2 years ago, and with him came a few of our relatives. They knew why they were coming, and they also knew they would be back in Egypt as soon as possible, and would never return to England. They have been here under false names on their passports, and should our plan have succeeded, they would have left afterward for Egypt, and once there, they would have been impossible to trace. That was their understanding, and they had little fear they would be found and returned to your country. Once returned, my brother regathered his ropes and chains, and with his relations fashioned the length of ropes and chains that were to be spun out after their ends were attached to the monument. These materials had to be fitted together and tested in a practical way to know they would serve when needed. During these 2 years, my brother improved his climbing skills and practiced with his ropes and chains the ability to carry them on his harness and work with them. He and his relations owned the business where he and they provided services for stone masonry and repair, and had built on its grounds a facsimile of the obelisk. Ormond practiced using the harness and chains until he perfected the exact method of reaching the positions of the stone and wrapping around it the chains that would be used to pull it down. I suppose you know the rest, Mr. Holmes. Like 2 nights ago, we knew this to be a perfect night because our comrades had talked with crew members of the City of London tugboat at a bar frequented by these men. They learned the patrol areas and times it would be near the obelisk. Our first attempt failed because, as we attempted our plan, we were observed by the watchman from the hotel's construction. Tonight was again perfect for our scheme. Shari Zorana looked at my friend without any expression of pleading her case or remorse. "Mr. Holmes," she asked, "how did you put yourself on the tug tonight?" "Ah," he responded, "that almost did not happen. I had spied on you and your brother last night, where the 2 of you were at the obelisk. The only words I heard your brother say to you were," and he shouted the words, "the City of London." Of course, I did not connect the phrase with being the proper noun title of the tug until tonight, and I only understood this with very little time to spare. "It was something you said, Lestrade, earlier this evening." Holmes had turned to the inspector. What mechanism could the Arana siblings have that would tear down the monument? I confess that I was so baffled by this that I placed it from my mind, focusing my attention on their observation and apprehension. That, I believed, was the key to thwarting their plan. But without the mechanism, my theory about all of this was a mere academic exercise, as you attempted to point out, though you used very different phrasing. Holmes smiled. He returned his attention to Shari Zorana, but he also took in all of us as he came to reveal what he had orchestrated after he had left the cab and ran out into the night. I arrived at the harbour master's office and asked where the tug might be. They have there a fast police boat, which I boarded along with 2 officers. Another 2 Navy sailors who were there for their own purposes joined us, motivated either by my asking for their help or duty or adventure. Into the river we sped to find the City of London. Using the harbour master's instructions, this was not too lengthy a chore. I understood Orman Arana to be in the water, waiting from his sister's magical fire to signal to him that the concrete surround had no constables or real numbers of citizens who may have attempted to thwart him, and that it was safe for him to make his way to the monument with his harness and ropes. We sighted the running lights of what one of the police knew to be those of the tug some 3 miles from the concrete surround. She was moving swiftly with the tide, but was no match for our speed, and shortly we came about to her stern, where we signalled the crew, and soon the boat was slowed. The pilot of our police boat stayed at his post, but the 4 others joined me in climbing the ladder on the starboard side, and soon again we were underway. This little mattered to the crew, as police boarding the tug was a normal part of what happened on any given evening. We encountered a few crew members who looked at us with wonder and dismay, but we hushed them and even collected them to stay by us for a time, and they accepted this with an understanding. There was some sense of urgency and police work at the heart of our boarding the boat. This was the happiest news, as it meant that none of the conspirators were on top deck, and they were unaware of our preparing for whatever they were organising. We all saw the small steamboat make its way to the embankment, and from it we saw a man had climbed onto the concrete just below the obelisk. We saw in the moonlight the ropes and how they had been attached to the stone structure, and it was immediately obvious to all what their goal was and how they were going to use the tug. Holmes turned to Shari Zorana. "The fire was a brilliant idea. Did you use potassium permanganate?" The young woman leaned back in her chair and nearly smiled. Her eventual silence told my friend he would have to continue to guess at this on his own. Holmes moved away from this minor mystery. We stayed aft and did nothing but watch as around us the piracy took shape. From below deck, presumably hidden during the tug's journey to that point, came 4 men, all of whom immediately moved to the wheelhouse, forcing command of the helm. Power to the tug's engines was slowed substantially, and up onto the deck came, with assistance, the 2 strands of rope. Ormanarana and his sister Charis came up afterward. Almost immediately, the vast paddles once more moved, and the boat began to sail into the heart of the Thames. The police went into the wheelhouse to encounter 2 other crew and the captain, all held at bay by one man with a revolver. A second man was at the helm. I turned and moved back down the deck, now on the port side, never really knowing the fate of what happened at the control of the tug. But the naval men stayed with me, and we made our way to the 2 men who were helping the Aranas board the ship. We were even numbers, and after the naval men bested the pirates who were before us, I loosed the ropes from the Samson posts, and that was where we met for the first time. Holmes said to Charis Arana, "With the ropes detached and tossed into the Thames, the naval men ran to the wheelhouse and reported to the police that control of the ship no longer aided in their scheme, and the conspirators at the control soon gave up." Holmes had finished his explanation of the night's events. Charis Arana looked at him one final time as he rose to leave. She seemed to want to say something more to him, and perhaps he may have wanted to listen to her, but he realized from this point on, official matters had to begin. She lowered her head, wrapped in her own private thoughts. Smythe and Lestrade looked up at us as Holmes took hold of the handle to the wood and glass door, turned it, and left with me following. I was silent for a while in the cab as it took us back to Baker Street. I broke my silence with a puzzle of my own that had been on my mind ever since Holmes concluded his explanation of the night's activities. If their sole object is destruction of the needle, then they may find a stick or 2 of dynamite would serve their purposes better. For a brief time I had caught Holmes off guard, but he responded, and Ellis Danders would not drink his mushroom-laced tea, and Charis Arana would not walk the park and the Victoria Embankment, wearing her costume and holding her parasol, and Ormanarana would not choose a rope system for taking down the needle. Holmes took in the quizzical look I gave to him. People will have their pleasures, and it's often difficult to fathom how those we include in our list of acceptable caprices are normal to us, though strange to others. I suppose the Arana siblings probably enjoyed the irony that the tools used to wrap around an obelisk in its being raised up by their ancient forebears would be employed in a method to tear it down. "I hope," Holmes said, "that this bit of melodrama finds its way into your collection. It has what I think you believe your readership appreciates, an event that borders on the bizarre, a desire by criminals to achieve what they believe is a just end, and as an occasional bone to me, those points of deduction that merit study. And do a good job of it, Watson. Least London society will call for the abandonment of my biographer in trade for Mr. Gilbert, and your magazine stories about my achievements will be replaced by his librettos set to the tunes of Sullivan's music." Holmes laughed outrageously at his own joke,